So it always helps to be comfy, and if you are a bit sleepy, might help to keep your eyes open or to be a bit more upright. But listening is kind of mostly receptive. It can get quite active if we get excited about the story. And we practiced a few weeks ago a bit with leaning forwards or leaning back. So we can be aware of what we're doing with our bodies as part of listening awareness. And then we're bringing our attention to the present moment. Maybe feeling our bottom on our seat again, or our sitting bones, feet on the ground. And in the stories, we leave our time now. We go to another time, another place. And we're listening from the here and now. And we might be bringing something to the story. As we've checked in, so we might be bringing some contentment or excitement or anxiety. And that's all okay. You can notice that and let it be there, be part of the experience. Maybe we notice our mind is a bit distracted and goes off into the past or the future. And that will probably happen during the story too. And as soon as we notice, we can bring our attention back to where the story is in that moment and join back in. We are leaving our time now. We are leaving our time now. We are leaving our time now. Going to a time which may have been only last Tuesday, or perhaps it was much longer ago. And we're going to meet the little brother and the little sister. One day, there was a little brother, and he took his little sister by the hand. "Listen," he whispered. "Since our mother died, we haven't been happy for a single hour or even a minute. The stepmother beats us every single day, and her one-eyed daughter kicks us away whenever we get near her. And what's more, we only get stale bread crusts to eat. Even the dog under the table gets better food than we do. He sometimes gets a bit of meat. God knows, if our mother could see how we have to live now. Let's go away. Let's go away together. Run away into the big wide world out there. We couldn't be any worse off if we were tramps." Little sister nodded, because every word her brother said was true. they waited till their stepmother was having a nap, and then they left the house, closing the door very quietly behind them. And they walked and they walked and they walked the whole day, across meadows, across fields, across pastures and stony land. And then it began to rain, and the little sister said, "God's crying now, and our hearts are crying with him." In the evening, they came to a forest, and they were so exhausted and so hungry and sorrowful and frightened of the dark that was gathering all around them, that all they could do was climb into a hollow tree and fall asleep. When they awoke in the morning, the sun was already shining down into their tree. And little brother said, "Sister, sister, wake up. It's warm and sunny. I'm really thirsty. I think I can hear a spring. Come, let's go and find it so we can have a drink of water." Little sister woke up too, and hand in hand they went in search for the spring that they could hear among the trees. Now, the trouble was that their stepmother was a witch. And she was one of those witches that could see through her eyelids. And ever since they'd left the house, she'd been creeping after them in the way that witches do, flattening herself against the ground, very close to the ground, so they could not see her. And she had put a spell on all the springs in the forest. And soon, little brother and little sister found the spring they'd heard, and they saw the fresh, cold water glistening as it ran over the stones. And it couldn't have looked more inviting if they'd been running through the desert for 3 days and nights. So they both knelt down to drink. Now, little sister had learnt how to listen to what running water was saying. And she could hear the spring talking. And just as little brother was raising his cupped hands to his dry mouth, she cried out, "Don't drink, don't drink. The spring is bewitched. Anyone who drinks from it will turn into a tiger. Put it down, don't drink it, because you'll tear me to pieces." Little brother did as she said, thirsty as he was. And so they walked on, and they soon found another spring. And this time she knelt down first and put her head close to the water and listened again. "No, not this one either," she said. It says, "Whoever drinks from me will become a wolf." I think the stepmother must have put a spell on this one too. "But I'm so thirsty," he said. "Yeah, but if you become a wolf, you'll eat me up at once." "I promise I won't." "No, wolves don't remember promises. There must be a spring she hasn't bewitched. Let's keep looking." And it wasn't long before they found a third spring. And this time little sister bent over and listened carefully again and heard the water say, "Whoever drinks me will be turned into a deer. Whoever drinks me will be turned into a deer." She turned to tell her brother, but it was too late. He was so thirsty that he'd thrown himself full length, face forward, into the water and started drinking. He was so thirsty. And as soon as the water passed into his mouth, his face changed and it lengthened and became covered in very fine, very soft hairs. And his legs became thinner and longer and changed into a deer's legs. And he stood up, sort of tottering uncertainly. And there he was, a young deer, a fawn. Little sister saw him looking around nervously. He looked like he was about to flee, and she flung her arms around his neck and hugged him. and said, "Brother, it's me, your sister. Don't run away, or we'll both be lost forever." "Ah, what have you done? What have you done, my poor brother? What have you done? What are we going to do?" She wept. And the fawn wept too. And they wept for a long time. And finally, little sister gathered herself and said, "Now, stop crying, my sweet little dear. I promise I'll never, ever leave you. Come on, we've got to make the best of this." She took off the golden garter that she wore and put it around the fawn's neck. And then she wove some rushes into a cord and tied it to the garter. Leading him along with this, she walked onwards, further and further and deeper into the forest. And after they'd walked a very long way, they came to a clearing amongst the trees. And in the clearing, there was a little house. Little sister stopped and looked all around. It was very quiet. The garden was neatly kept and the door of the house was open. "Is anyone at home?" she called. No reply. She and the fawn went inside and they found the neatest and cleanest little home they'd ever seen. Their stepmother, the witch, didn't care for housekeeping. Her house was always cold and dirty, but this one was delightful. "What we'll do," she said to the fawn, "is we'll look after this house really well. We'll keep it really neat and tidy. And then if anyone comes back, they won't mind that we've stayed here because we've kept it so nice." So that's what they did. And she talked to the fawn all the time. He understood her well enough and obeyed her when she said, "Don't eat the plants in the garden, and when you want to pee-pee or do the other thing, you must go outside." She made him a bed on the hearth from soft moss and leaves, very, very comfortable bed for him. And every morning she went out and gathered food for herself, wild berries and nuts, sweet tasting roots. And there were carrots and beans and cabbages in the vegetable garden. And she always made sure to gather plenty of fresh, sweet grass for the deer, who ate it from her hand. He was happy to play around wherever she was hanging out. And in the evening, when little sister had washed and said her prayers and lay down with her head on the deer's back for a pillow, they slept contentedly. And if only little brother had still been human, their life would have been pretty perfect. So they lived like that for some time. And then one day, it so happened that the king was holding a great hunt in the forest. The trees resounded with the sound of horns, the barking of hounds, the joyful shouts of the huntsmen. The fawn pricked up his ears and longed to be outside with the hunt. "Let me go with them, sister," he begged. "I'd give anything to join them in the hunt." He pleaded so passionately that she gave in. "But," she said, as she opened the door, "make sure you come back by evening. I'm going to lock the door in case the wild huntsmen come by. So to let me know it's you, knock on the door and say, 'Sister dear, your brother's here. Sister dear, your brother's here.' Got that? And if you don't say that, I won't open the door because I won't know it's you." The young deer was out through the door in a flash, bounding away into the trees. He'd never felt so good, so happy, or so free as when the huntsmen saw him and started after him and failed to catch him. Whenever they came near and thought they'd surely catch him now, he managed to leap away again into the bushes and disappear. And when it was getting dark, he ran back to the little house and knocked on the door. "Sister dear, your brother's here." And little sister opened the door immediately. He trotted in happily and told her all about the hunt. And that night he slept very deeply. When the morning came, and he again heard the distant music of the horns and the hounds barking, he couldn't resist. These hunts could go on for several days. And he said, "Sister, please open the door, I beg you. I had such a good time yesterday. I must go and join again, or I'll die of longing." Little sister wasn't happy about this and opened the door and said, "Okay then, don't forget the password when you come back." He didn't reply. He was bounding away towards the hunt already. And when the king and his huntsmen saw the deer with the golden collar, they gave chase at once. Through the brambles and briars and thickets and across clearings, the little deer ran and ran and ran all day long. And he led the hunt on a very wild chase indeed. Several times they nearly caught him, and when the sun was setting, a shot from a gun wounded him in his leg. After that, he couldn't run so fast anymore, and one of the hunters managed to follow him home and saw him knock and heard him say the words, "Sister dear, your brother's here." And the huntsman saw the door open, and he saw the little girl letting in the deer and shut the door again. And he went right back to the king and told him what he'd seen. "Is that so?" said the king. "Well, we shall hunt him all the harder tomorrow." Little sister was frightened when she saw that her deer was wounded. She washed the blood off his leg and put a poultice of herbs on the wound to help it heal. And in fact, the wound wasn't that serious. And when the little deer woke up in the morning, he'd forgotten all about it. And he begged her to let him go out a third day. "Sister, I can't tell you the passion in my breast for the hunt. I must go and join in again, or I'll go mad." Little sister began to weep. "Yesterday they wounded you," she sobbed, and today they'll kill you. And I could be left alone in these wild woods. Think of that. I'll have no one left. I can't let you go out, I can't. Then I'll die here in front of you. When I hear the notes of the horn, I feel every atom of my body leaping with joy. My longing is too much for me, sister. I beg you, let me go." Again, she couldn't resist his pleas, and with a heavy heart, she unlocked the door. And without even a backward glance, the deer leaped out of the door and bounded away into the forest. Meanwhile, the king had given orders to his huntsmen that they should do the deer no harm. "If you see the deer with the golden collar, put your guns up and hold the hounds back. 10 golden coins for the man who sees him first." They hunted the deer through the forest all day long, through every part of the forest. And finally, as the sun was already setting, the king called the huntsman to him. "Show me where that cottage is. If we can't catch him this way, we'll trap him another way." What was the little rhyme he said? The huntsman who'd seen the whole thing repeated it for him. And when they reached the cottage, the king knocked on the door and said, Sister dear, your brother's here. The door opened at once. The king walked in and found there, standing, a girl more beautiful than any girl he'd ever seen before. She was frightened to see a man instead of her little dear. But as the man was wearing a golden crown and had a very kind face and a kind smile, she calmed down, and he reached out his hand and took hers. Will you come to my palace with me, he said, and be my wife? Yes, said little sister, but my little dear must come too. I won't go without him. He can come by all means, said the king. He shall live as long as you do, and he shall want for nothing. And as he said that, the little deer himself came jumping through the door. Little sister caught him by his golden collar and tied the cord of rushes to it. And the king lifted the girl onto his horse, and they all went home to the palace, the little deer trotting proudly behind his sister and the king. Soon after, there was a big wedding celebration, and little sister became the queen. As for little brother the deer, he had the whole of the palace gardens to play in, and a team of servants to look after him, the groom of the grass, the valet of the horns and the hooves, and the maid of the golden comb, whose job it was to groom him thoroughly every day and every evening, to deal with any ticks or fleas or lice that might have gotten into his coat during the day. They were all very happy. Now, all this time, the wicked stepmother had thought that by now the little brother and the little sister must have been torn to pieces by wild animals in the woods. But when she read in the paper that little sister had become a queen and that her constant companion was a deer, it didn't take her long to work out what had happened. That wretched boy must have drunk from the stream I put the curse on, she said to her daughter. It's not fair, the daughter whined. I ought to be a queen, not her. Shut your moaning, said the old woman. When the time comes, you'll get what you deserve. More time went past, and the queen gave birth to a child, a handsome little boy. The king was out hunting at the time, and the witch and her daughter went to the palace disguised as chambermaids and managed to find their way into the queen's bedchamber. Come now, your majesty, the witch said to the queen, who was lying weak and exhausted in her bed after childbirth. Your bath is ready. It will make you feel so much better. Come with us. They carried her to the bathroom and put her in the tub. And then they lit a fire underneath it. And it was such a great fire that the queen suffocated from the smoke. And to hide their crime, they closed the wall up by magic where the door had been and hung a tapestry over it. Now, you get into the bed, the witch said to her daughter. And when the girl had clambered in, the old woman put a spell on her so that she looked exactly like the queen. And the only thing she couldn't change was the missing eye. Lie with that side of your head on the pillow, she said, and if anyone speaks to you, just mumble. So when the king came home that evening and heard that he had a little son, he was delighted. And he went straight to his dear wife's bedchamber and was about to open the curtains to see how she was, when the false chambermaid said, "Don't, Your Majesty, don't open the curtains on any account. She needs rest now and she must not be disturbed." So the king tiptoed away, and he didn't discover that a false queen was lying in his wife's bed. That night, the deer wouldn't sleep in his stable. He climbed the stairs to the nursery where the baby lay and refused to leave it. And of course, he couldn't explain himself, for since the death of the queen, he had lost the power to speak. So he lay down beside the cradle and went to sleep. At midnight, the nurse who slept there awoke suddenly, and she saw the queen coming into the nursery, and she seemed to be wet all the way from her head to her feet, as if she'd just come from a bath. And she saw the queen bend over the cradle and kiss the baby, and then she stroked the deer and said, "How is my child? How is my dear? I'll come here twice more and then I'll disappear." And then she went out without another word. The nurse was too frightened to tell anyone. She thought the queen was still lying in bed, recovering from childbirth. And the next night, the same thing happened again, except this time the queen seemed to be covered in little flames. And she said, again, "How is my child? How is my dear? I'll come here once more and then I must disappear." Now, this time the nurse thought she should tell the king. So the next night, the king was waiting in the nursery with her when at midnight, again, the queen came into the room, and this time she was wreathed in thick black smoke. The king cried, "Dear God, what's this?" The queen ignored him and went to the child and the deer as she'd done before and said, "How is my child? How is my dear? I've come for the last time. I must disappear." The king tried to embrace her, but she faded into smoke and drifted out of his arms and just mingled with the air in the room and disappeared. The deer tugged on the king's sleeve and pulled him to the place where the tapestry was hanging. And then he pulled the tapestry down and butted the wall with his little horns. And the king understood there was something there, and he ordered his servants to knock the wall down. During all this disturbance, the fake queen got out of bed. Nobody noticed, and she tiptoed away. And when the wall was down and they discovered the bathroom all blackened with soot and the queen's body lying there, clean and pale and fresh in the bath, the king cried, "My wife, my dear wife!" He bent over to embrace her body, and in that moment, by the grace of God, she came alive again. She told him about the dreadful crime that had been committed against her, and the king sent his fastest messenger to the palace gates just in time to tell the watchman to arrest the witch and her daughter as they were trying to creep out. And the two of them were brought before the court, and a judgment was pronounced. The daughter was to be led into the woods where the wild beasts would eat her, and the witch was to be burnt. And as soon as the old woman was reduced to nothing but ashes, her spell lost its power over the deer, and he was transformed back again into little brother, human again. And he and little sister lived happily together for the rest of their lives.